Hello, welcome to tutorial number 12 in the series of beginners Java tutorials from caveofprogramming.com. And in this tutorial, we're going to look at multi-dimensional arrays in Java. So a one-dimensional array would be, for example, I could say int array values equals, and then I could specify a bunch of integers here, like this. And the reason this is called a one-dimensional array is because to specify the position of one of the items in this lit, I just need one number or dimension. So I could say, sysout values 2, for example. And here I get my array value. So I'm just using one dimension here to specify this one array index. A multi-dimensional array would require more than one array index to specify the value. So in this tutorial I'm just going to look at two-dimensional arrays, but you can easily extrapolate this to 3 or 4 dimensional arrays if you're completely crazy. So let's have a look at an example of a two-dimensional array. So the first difference is to create the variable that will point to the array, I need two sets of square brackets like this. And then I say, let's say, I'll call this grid and I'll set this equal to, and I open my bracket as before and I'll close it down here and I'll put a semicolon in. And now what we're going to have in here? Well, in Java, the important thing to realize is that a multi-dimensional array is just an array of arrays. So here, each element in this array is an integer. Because this is a two-dimensional array, each element in this array will be another array. So for example, I could have this one as an element. I could put that in there. And because each element is an array, and actually each element technically is a reference to an array, unlike in C++, say, the different elements of this array don't have to be the same length. So I could have like 2 values here, for example, and then I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4. I could have 4 values here, and so on. So this is a multi-dimensional array, and most often probably you'll want to have the same number of values in each row, but as I say, it's optional. And to refer to values in this is basically a table or a grid of numbers. What you do is, I could say, let's say I want to refer to this value. So I type grid, which is the name of the array reference here, the array variable, and then this is row 0, row 1, row 2, and you need the row first, because if you think of these as being, each of these is an element of the kind of bigger array, the outer array, then the first thing you need to do is specify the position of this. So in other words, you type the row index first. It's always row column. So here, this is row, it's the second row, but because we start numbering from 0, this is array index 1. And then again, this is going to be going to be at index 0 within that row, and this is going to be at index 1. So here again, it's going to be 1 1. So this means row 1 column 1, but don't forget you start numbering from 0. So 0 1 for the rows, and then 0 1 for the columns. Let's output this value, and I should get 4. I can also, of course, output, for example, maybe it's less confusing if I output a value that isn't at 1 1. So let's say this one will be 0 and 0 1 2. So this value is 0 2. So if I copy that and output this, I will say 0 2. So row 0 column 2, and I output that and I get 2 3 4 3 again. Now here I'm initializing the array at the same time that I declare it, and of course I can just create the array first and initialize it later. I could say, what about, I could use a string, let's say string array. So a two-dimensional array of strings, call it texts, equals, and I say new string, and here I have the number of entries that I want in the sort of outer array, in other words the number of rows that I want here. So let's have 2 rows, and then I specify the number of columns that I want in this array. Let's say 3. So this is an array of strings, a two-dimensional array of strings, and technically a two-dimensional array of references to strings. And I could output any value in this array of strings by saying, let's say, I could have text 0, and then let's output, so 0th row and first column. And of course, because I haven't set any strings yet, that will be null. And I could of course assign values to these strings by saying, let's say, text 0, 0 and 1 equals hello there, and let's just put this up here so that I set it before I output it, and you get hello there. Iterating through arrays of strings, iterating through two-dimensional arrays of strings or integers or whatever, is of course a little bit more complex than the one-dimensional case. You could use the for loop with a colon style of doing it, but I think it's actually simpler just to stick to for loops with loop counters for two-dimensional arrays. So let's look at how you do that. So what you do is first you iterate through the rows, and then you iterate through the columns. So you have a nested for loop within a for loop. So for the outer array, let's take grid, and I'll say for int I equals 0, I less than grid dot length, as if it was a one-dimensional array, I plus plus. So this is iterating over the rows here, and now I want to iterate over the columns within this. So I say for, and I need to choose a different name for the loop variable here to avoid a conflict. So I'll say for int k equals 0. In fact, just to make it clearer, I could in fact not use I, but I could call this row. So row, that's better actually. And then here I could say for int col equals 0, col less than. Now what is the dimension of the row that we want to iterate over? I mean, what's the length of the row that I'm iterating over? It's actually going to be grid array brackets row dot length, and then col plus plus. And of course, as always, you can take a close look at this code and try to get your head around it on caveofprogramming.com, which is all one word. And let's say I can output now grid, and I need row, and then the column. And a handy thing to do with arrays to make your output look nice is I can change println to print. So instead of printing each number here on its own line, I can print them all out one after the other on the same line. And I can just print out here, actually, I just add here some space after each number. Or if you put /t in quotes, that will output a tab character. So I'm just concatenating space here to this string that I'm outputting. Well, it's not actually a string, it's an integer, but Java will understand that I want to create a string here. And then after each row, so within the outer loop and not within the inner loop, I want to output a new line. So I can just output a empty sysout.println. And this is quite complex, but just play around with it, look at the code, try and change it, and you'll soon get the hang. So if I output that, it's outputting my grid of numbers here, nicely formatted as here. Okay, I mean that's about it for multi-dimensional arrays. I probably should mention the case where, for example, you could do something like string array, 2D array, let's call it words equals new string, and I could just specify only the first dimension here. I could say that's gonna be 2, so I'm gonna have 2 rows in my array and leave the last one empty. And what that would do was it would not set each row to anything, so each row would be null. If I do sysout words 0, for example, that will output null here. So the last array index here is allowed to be empty, and then you have to set it manually, so to speak, to an array. So you have to set up your sub arrays one by one. So I could say words 0 equals new string array. Let's give it a dimension of 3, like this, and then I'm able to say things like words row 0, and then columns are now within this array, so I could say 1, for example, equals, hi there, and then I could output that, copy and sysout, control space for the autocomplete, and this will output hi there. So okay, that's it for this tutorial, quite complex, and in the next tutorial, unless I think of something else important that I haven't told you meanwhile, we will look at classes and objects, and you can find this code on caveofprogramming.com. So do visit that, and please click like if you like the video, and I hope you'll join me next time. So until then, happy coding.